I'm Itumeleng Merafe, and I like to call myself an accidental banker. My journey is marred with lots of change, exploration, and curiosity. I started at Investec in 2006, started in a client support center, which is probably one of the best places to start in this organization because you really learn the true ethos of looking after our clients, breaking China, and what our culture truly is about. I have spent the last 18 years working in the different divisions in the organization, in private bank, corporate institutional banking, as well as Investec for business, in very different roles. And I think my ability to have navigated those spaces was, the first was getting good at my craft in the spaces that I found myself and using that as a springboard to build a network, but remaining curious about what else. And through that curiosity, meeting really interesting people. And that's led me to a space where I find myself today. I'd say the first and most important thing is to be present in the space you find yourself. None of us start where we end up, where we want to end up. And so often we spend too much time looking ahead and we mess up on the thing that's right in front of us right now. Be incredibly good at the craft that you're starting in, whatever role it is, whether you find yourself in a filing room or whatever it is, the thing that you first find yourself doing, be very good at that craft. Because as you get good at a craft and you build the habit of doing things well, your brand starts being built around that, around excellence, around delivery, around execution. And so the next big thing, the proverbial next big thing, that opportunity typically comes and is attracted to those who are already doing things, right? So treat your current thing as your next big thing. And when you approach it with that, you'll have the energy that will attract the next thing. But not only that, you would have built the muscle that allows you to seize that next big thing. How I've learned to make decisions has really been a few things. The one is around consultation. I've been really intentional around the people that I have around me, sounding boards that I use, and people that I can rely on to give me a view. I think the second part that's been really important to me is this idea of remaining curious. So I think sometimes when we make decisions, we approach them with a trepidation, or almost a view like, if I make the wrong decision, it's the end of the world, when very few things are that binary. So I found in making decisions, I've always gone with the information set that I have in front of me right now, what's the best way forward, and almost having a level of curiosity around what comes of it. Because life is a process of iterations. And so as I've thought about what that next move is, I haven't been too sort of hung up around, is this the wrong or right thing, and making it feel binary or final. But rather that this leads me to my next thing and my next challenge. And so that process and the curiosity around the iterative process has really stood me in good stead. Yeah, so I think in life we all do our best to try and prepare, and plans don't always work. And I think in that scenario for me, there's an important thing around process and process integrity. I think where people feel failure and where it really hurts people is when you're just married to outcomes. So if everything you do is just about the outcome, if you don't get the outcome you anticipated, often people feel like they failed. Whereas for me, it's always about the process and preparation in trying to get to that outcome. Often you won't get to that outcome, which is what we call failure. But that process, if it's done well, has a richness to it where there's learning, and there's stuff in it that you can take out for the next thing. I think the second thing is to acknowledge that when you are in that scenario where you find yourself not getting what you wanted, to acknowledge the emotion and the place you find yourself, take what those learnings are from that thing and step into it again. And never to glibly try and, people use catchphrases all the time. Like every failure is a lesson. Yes, it is, but there's also disappointment in it. And I think it's important as people that we acknowledge the place that we are, acknowledge the emotional impact of the things that you've experienced before moving forward. And I think if you do that, you build the muscle of being able to absorb that. I also think that most things can feel like failures in the micro. Like, I didn't get this immediate thing that I wanted. But not losing sight of the bigger picture. Not losing sight of the fact that these things are not linear. Growth is not linear. And sometimes there are detours. Sometimes you have to take a step back now to move forward faster later. And I think having those principles in mind with myself at all times is always quite useful. How I define excellence is actually not so much in the large, complicated, complex things that you do. For me, excellence is a habit, right? So it's about presence in the things that you're doing and doing them to the best of your ability in that moment. And some days you may do it better than others. I think if you do that and you build that muscle, what tends to happen is when you get big opportunities, when the complex thing, when the big deal comes around, you've built the habit of doing things well. And that for me is excellence. there's 4 core relationships I've always leaned on. And maybe I'll just describe what they meant to me. I mean, the first one is probably things around friendship and what I call sort of my circle of influence. Me and my closest friends talk about this idea of positive peer pressure. So I've always been very mindful of the people that I surround myself with. There's an old adage that says, show me the 5 people you spend most of your time with and I'll tell you who you are. And so I'm very mindful about that. And that's always been my backbone, my consistent thread in my career. I think outside of that, what I've done is I've always linked into sort of 3 formal types of relationships in the context of business. I think there's mentorship, there's coaching, and there's sponsorship. And those things for me have distinct, they distinct things to me. So mentorship is around having a relationship with someone who's walked the journey ahead of you, who can be a sounding board. It's not necessarily someone who's a friend of yours, not necessarily someone whose social circle and yours necessarily are the same, but it's someone who you can trust, who's got a vested interest in seeing you do well, who when you find yourself at different crossroads in your career, they can help guide, they can be a sounding board, and they can hold you true. Coaching, on the other hand, is something that I've used where I've stepped into a particular role. So if I've stepped into a particular role that requires an upskilling, a particular skill set that I need to develop in a period of time, coaching is great for that. It's targeted, it's intentional, and it's specific. And it's often for a very specific time period. And I think in that time period, it's the thing that helps you level up. When we talk about climbing the corporate ladder, the thing about leveling up, often coaching is the thing that does that for you. And then the last one is sponsorship, which I think is not as well known, but is incredibly powerful. And really what sponsorship is about is the idea that who speaks on your behalf when you're not in the room, right? When it's rooms of influence and your name comes up, who holds space for you? And who's helping build your brand outside of where your own voice can reach? And I think the combination of those things are always a dynamic process for me, depending where I'm at. I think that, my mentorship journeys are long-standing relationships, whereas coaching is targeted and specific. And sponsorship is something that happens when someone says, I'm willing to risk my name and put my brand behind you based on your excellence, based on the work you deliver, based on your consistency. The one thing that I've learned about money and wealth creation for me is that it's never too soon to start, and it's never too small to start with. So many of us often think, when I earn X or when I do Y, I'll start saving, I'll start investing, all of that. The truth about it is, the best kept secret in wealth creation is time. The sooner you start, however little you start with, matters. So I think prior to me working in financial services, I would have always defined wealth as money. All right, I would have almost equated those two things. The advantage and privilege of what we do in this organization and environment is that you learn that wealth is far more than that. It's far more reaching than that, right? Money in and of itself is not useful, right? And I don't mean it in a glib way. I understand that you need a baseline in order to take care of your family and to survive. But what it's done for me, in my understanding of wealth, is that wealth actually is around your ability to own your own time, your ability to be in a position where you do the things you want to, not because you have to. And so working in financial services has broadened my perspective and scope of what wealth truly is. It's an understanding why money matters, what you can do with it, the security it gives you, but more than that, how it empowers you to be able to make particular decisions and do things that you choose out of desire as opposed to necessity. I think the one thing that I find really interesting about leadership in the world today and the impact of having younger leaders is that there's an element of being more purposeful in our leadership. So I think there's been a massive shift around leadership where it's not just about commercial imperatives. So I think younger leaders are more concerned about the environment, and not just younger leaders. I think leadership of today is more concerned about broader things outside of just the commercials. And so I think that the ability for leaders to create a connection with people and the purpose of what organizations do has become a massive shift in sort of modern day leadership. I also think that having a broader definition of what success is as organizations is certainly at the top of mind for leadership today.